everyone. Welcome to Boys in ECE, Responding Effectively to Gender-Based Needs. Today, we will be discussing an issue that rarely comes up in the ECE world when we are focusing on equity, that of meeting the unique needs of boys in our classrooms. Much as we like to think that we are treating all of our students equally, research provides evidence that our field is biased in favor of girls. Today, we will explore why this may be the case and how we can reframe some of our commonly held beliefs to ensure that little boys actually get their needs met. First, we will look at the evidence that shows us that boys need different experiences in ECE classrooms to truly thrive. We'll delve into some of the reasons that currently promoted educational practices and curricula do not provide equal opportunities for growth for both boys and girls, what science tells us about the differences between the sexes, and what unique needs boys have that may not be met in a typical preschool classroom today. Finally, our panelists will give you some insight from a male perspective as to how to best change our practices to make sure that we are meeting those needs. So why are we so concerned about boys? Boys are okay, right? Wiggly little fellows. However, there's mounting evidence that there is an equity problem in ECE classrooms. Let's see what the research has shown us. First of all, more boys, significantly more boys, are referred for evaluation for special needs. This means that they are perceived by adults as not fitting into the classroom's norms, either socially and emotionally or cognitively. This automatically places them at risk for school failure and tends to make them less likely to build strong relationships with adults and with their peers. Once boys have gone through the referral process, they are much more likely to actually be identified as a child in need of special services. Once they have been identified, the label follows them until they are deemed as no longer in need of special support services. This can be a year or two, or it can follow them throughout their school career. It can lead to teachers believing that they are more likely to cause trouble in their classrooms, or thinking that they do not have the same potential for success as their peers, especially their female peers. As you can see here, preschool boys receive nearly 80% of expulsions from preschool programs. Girls, on the other hand, only receive 21%. This means that boys are almost 4 times as likely as girls to be expelled from early childhood programs. 4 times. That's pretty incredible. In kindergarten, expulsions involve boys approximately 68% of the time, while girls are only involved in expulsions approximately 32% of the time. In both cases, in both age groups, in both settings, boys make up a lower percentage of the children enrolled than their rate of expulsion, considerably lower percentage. Children who are expelled in preschool or the primary grades are much more likely to fail a grade, to drop out before completing high school, to be held back from starting first grade, or be involved with the juvenile justice system. Information collected from early childhood education programs in elementary schools shows us that boys are more often reported to be physically aggressive, lack self-control, and be non-compliant with rules and teacher expectations. Because of those issues, boys are more frequently held back in kindergarten due to lack of school readiness. They are more likely, in fact, to be placed on behavior management plans or in remedial programs of one sort or another than are girls. So how in the world did our educational system become so unresponsive to the needs of half of our students? There have been several pieces of legislation passed over the years with only the best of intentions that have contributed to this situation. First of all, during the War on Poverty in 1965, Congress passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, otherwise known as ESEA, which prescribed special funding to support schools with high numbers of students living below the poverty line. These funds were intended to level the playing field for poor students by providing extra support for programs and services that improved school achievement and high school graduation rates. It was believed that these students would benefit most from focusing on academic supports. 36 years later, the No Child Left Behind Act set standards for schools to reach before funding for ESEA would be provided. Students participated in mass testing and had to show improvement over the previous year's scores to ensure funding for that school for the next year. As a result, students spent a much higher percentage of their school day focusing on academic subjects that were on the test, and schools decreased access to recess, the arts, and physical education. School readiness for preschool and kindergarten no longer encompassed social and emotional skills. Instead, students were assessed solely on their literacy and cognitive skills. Elementary level teaching practices were pushed down into the preschool classrooms, resulting in a heavily didactic or teacher-driven approach to educating all children. A second factor that has had a great influence on the climate in our classrooms is the evolution of Head Start. Since its inception, Head Start has been seen as a cutting-edge approach in early childhood education, with an emphasis on social competence, whole child learning, and nutrition and health. Families were seen as equal partners in the education of their children, and parents and caregivers were offered parenting and employment training and the opportunity to develop job skills and reach a higher level of compensation for their work. However, in 1983, Congress was spurred into action to improve education, and they legislated national standards for kindergarten readiness. Head Start then, in response, formalized standards for programs that were intended to prepare children for success in kindergarten. And the focus became more and more academic. 24 years later, in 2007, Under the influence of the No Child Left Behind Act, Congress passed another piece of legislation called the Improving Head Start for School Readiness Act. As a result, standards were set for child outcomes, and programs were required to implement curricula that supported growth in literacy, math, and science for every enrolled child. Programs that did not promote enough growth in these areas were placed on probation or defunded, resulting in the experiences being provided in Head Start classrooms changing to a much, much less boy-friendly environment. Part of the issue for schools was based on long-held perceptions of society about the sexes. Boys were seen as generally naughty, mischievous, and busy by nature. Girls, on the other hand, were seen as sweet and gentle and more compliant. There was a great deal of pressure for schools to produce boys that were more compliant. Teachers came into the field believing that boys needed stricter disciplinary standards and more punishment. Girls were treated very differently. When teachers begin to consider how to provide more equitable standards for their students, the question of whether boys are really all that different from their female counterparts comes up. So now we're going to explore what biological differences truly exist between the sexes. The first major genetic difference is hormonal production. This begins in the womb and continues throughout their years of growth and development. Hormones drive behavior, learning, and cognition, as well as physical growth. In addition, a great deal of research has confirmed that male children generally have slower growth in the prefrontal cortex of their brains. This difference persists into young adulthood, causing boys to have more of a tendency towards aggression and less ability to control their anger and other emotions. In addition, the prefrontal cortex controls focus and retention of information. In other words, that part of their brain is extremely important in their ability to learn and their ability to socialize with other children successfully. One of the things that has had the strongest effect on the way that we treat boys is the sociocultural expectations that boys are under. Every society has very different expectations for boys and for girls. This affects not only children's behaviors and perceptions of self-worth, but the teacher's ideas about what's acceptable behavior for each sex and what should be discouraged. Each culture teaches boys and girls to behave in a certain way and reinforces those expectations by disciplining non-conforming children. As a result, boys are often disciplined more than girls because it's assumed that they will behave in a certain way just because they are male. Another factor that strongly affects healthy growth and development for young boys is the fact that 97.2% of teachers and caregivers in preschool and kindergarten classrooms are female. They are also directed and supported by women, which leads to a very female-focused climate in our early education classrooms. So, taking all of those things into consideration, now we need to get an understanding of what do boys really need for us to provide in their classrooms? What do we need to provide to help boys really thrive? First of all, boys need to have the opportunity to experiment and to explore their world. At times, this can be pretty messy, but they need this kind of sensory input to strengthen the neural connections in their brains. Remember, we're trying to develop those prefrontal cortexes as much as we possibly can. They also need hands-on opportunities to develop their fine motor skills, not pencils and worksheets, but first manipulatives, Lego bricks, everything that will help them to develop fine motor skills and give them the opportunity to build and to create. Boys also need the opportunity to be active and engage in rough and tumble play that will allow them to test their gross motor skills. This can be somewhat disconcerting to female teachers, but it is definitely a need that boys have. Rather than focusing on structured, teacher-driven activities, boys need the opportunity to participate in whole body, hands-on, and open-ended play to encourage creativity and cognitive growth. Another need that boys have is to be recognized for the things that they do well. They have many unique skills, and we need to acknowledge them in order to promote self-esteem and a sense of competence. Finally, boys need full access to the arts. Most artistic activities promote focus, creativity, persistence, fine motor skills, and group participation skills, all things that boys need to become successful adults. Now I would like to introduce our panel members who will tell us a little bit about how they came to be part of the 2.8% and give us their perspective on how to create and implement an equitable environment for both boys and girls. Thank you. So first of all, I would like to ask each one of you to introduce yourself and just say a little bit about how you ended up in the field of early childhood. So could we start with Trey, please?
Yes, my name is Trayvon Askew. I am a preschool teacher at New Legacy Charter School currently. I've been in the education field approximately 6 years now. And what has led me to be in the early childhood ECE in particular was just a kind of experiencing different age groups, and then once I, was actually within ECE, I noticed this like significant development that you kind of noticed immediately, and that just wasn't something that I had experienced with the other age groups. So I thought that was quite impressive to kind of see some of those things that you were instilling in children occur so quickly, and you kind of witnessed that. So.
Amazing, isn't it? Thank you, Trayvon. Joseph, could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in the early childhood field?
Yeah, so my background was in intercultural studies in college, and that led me to wanting to work in anti-human trafficking, actually. And after doing some volunteer work with an anti-trafficking organization, I realized how slim the opportunities for work are in that field. Um, so I started to rethink how I could still make an impact towards that cause by pursuing another field for work. And in my trainings for like trauma-informed care and how we respond to um, victims and survivors of trafficking, we learned a lot about how the early childhood experience influences those later life outcomes, and how positive early childhood experiences is a great deterrent to people becoming susceptible to those kinds of situations. So my idea was I can look into the field of early childhood education and see where that leads me. So I found myself a place at Mile High Early Learning, where I started as a staff aide and kept going to school and receiving all the education I needed to keep moving up and onward in this field. So I did lead teaching for a little over 2 years, and then moved on to a coaching position now. That's where I'm at.
Mitchell, would you like to tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in early childhood?
Yes, so so my background stems from the arts. I was a film studies major, and then I worked in entertainment for about a decade. And my work in entertainment, I would work on these like family movies, and then like especially like some Nickelodeon and Disney projects. That really got me working with kids. And then I realized how much I actually enjoyed like working with kids, and being able to like, I guess, interact and like help with their development. And then I guess that's pretty much what transitioned me into like looking for an opportunity in education. So that's when I found Teach for America, and they kind of streamlined the process to really get me in the classroom, quickly with just like a bachelor's degree. And their partnership with Mile High is what landed me at Mile High Early Learning. And yeah, I've been working as a teacher here for a year. And yeah, that's my background.
Great. Thank you so much, Mitchell. Soren, would you like to share a little bit about your background and how you ended up in early childhood? You've got to unmute yourself, Soren. Sorry.
Sorry, unmuted and muted. Yeah, I've been in early childhood around over 15 years. My journey kind of started when I was in high school. I did my volunteering in a for National Honor Society in the early childhood classroom, and I found it was really rewarding job. Kids really were really receptive, and kind of fun just to enjoy that experience, those young ages. Took a little detour, but then I've been in it ever since. For a while, as I said. So that's kind of what sparked me into it. And I also, I think it's been always helpful kind of in the field. Growing up, I only had just 3 sisters and myself and my parents. So growing up with women, I think it kind of helps me as I do this journey, because it's, as you mentioned, it is a more of a female dominated field. So that helps kind of as I continue my path in this experience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those interesting facts that you all shared. So the first question that I'm going to throw out to the group is related to how you think your own experiences growing up may have affected the kinds of experiences that you either offered as an educator yourself or are promoting for educators in early childhood classrooms. So here, let's just focus a little bit on how your growing up years may have affected the way that you teach or you would promote other teachers teaching. Feel free to just dive in, take turns.
I guess I'll start.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, the majority of what I can remember from my earliest years in education was just getting in trouble all the time, preschool. Lots of different reasons why, I suppose, but I just always remember getting scolded at nap time for not sleeping. And then my mom moved me to a school she didn't know was all Spanish speaking, and I didn't speak Spanish.
Oh my gosh.
So I was I think I was looked at as defiant because I didn't understand what we were being told to do. But anyway, after all of that, I ended up going to a preschool or a kindergarten that was very play-based and had a very kind teacher who kind of set the stage for me to enjoy school and learning. And something that kind of just stuck with me from there is, as much as the teachers make the experience enjoyable, the more I enjoyed learning. And so that's what I brought to my practices as an educator when it was my turn. You know, I try to make it as engaging and as fun as I can in my classroom without being too rigid or too controlling over what happens in the class, you know, within reason. But as long as I was keeping it fun, I knew that the kids were enjoying themselves at school, and I would hope that that stays, you know, sticks with them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. It sounds like you were very much interested in developing the foundation for boys to be successful in learning, as well as girls.
Definitely, yeah.
Pretty much benefits from that kind of an approach. What other things do you all bring to early childhood from your earlier experiences?
I think what had inspired me the most was that during my educational journey, I didn't have a male teacher until I was in high school, and that was like my senior year in high school, you know. So it kind of felt like there wasn't a real model to follow. And just a little background about myself, just prior to getting into education, I was doing a lot of nonprofit work within my own community, working with a lot of the boys within the community. If that was just like giving resources or just giving them a different outlet, you know, just kind of what I didn't see in the education field, or just what a lot of us young men are, you know, lacking in particular, just role models, you know. So I think that had inspired me to make that transition into education, and just having that idea that I can impact so many more lives being in that classroom setting and being a model. So
That's very, very important, I think, providing more male role models in our early childhood classrooms. What else do you guys bring?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, for me, as I think about my experiences in family, you know, as I mentioned, I had had sisters growing up, so I kind of take my practices as you mentioned, there are these expectations that boys have, but you know, I was like, having sisters, I was dressed up in drag sometimes as we did our play and stuff. So like kind of understanding there's different ways that boys can be. But there are, as you mentioned in your conversation, there's a lot that is very normal or typical with boys. And then thinking kind of as Drayvon was talking about, I think it's the male influence. You know, I didn't really have it. I had one at third grade, and then it took me a while too. And the third grade was just because of overcrowding. And then I also think of it as like my experience, since I didn't really come from a family with a lot of men in it. Thinking about how we can really support that sensitivity for boys, because it is there, but I think people think, as you're saying, it's aggression, it's defiance, but boys can be sensitive. They can have some emotional outlets that we often think of as defiance. So kind of those always come to mind when I think about my childhood with my education and my family.
Wow. Yeah. You know, you make a really good point there about the fact that boys can be sensitive, boys can be caring, and it doesn't make them any less male for all of that. You know, it's important for boys to feel okay with whoever they are, I think. Mitchell, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I sure do. I think so. For me, when I was a kid, I had an older brother. He was like a couple years older than me. So my experience was really like following like in his footsteps, because we would always like have the same teachers, I guess, eventually. So a lot of the teachers had these expectations of what like his sibling would be like, because he was such a like aggressive type of character. And so I think really like, I guess the positivity, like once they seen that I was actually, because I was always a lot more calm and a lot more like disciplined and well behaved, I guess. So they would always be like very like surprised and be like, oh, he's like smart and he's actually following the rules. And I think just that positivity is like what I also like try to be aware of as a teacher, you know, to just bring that to the students and know that that's actually going to take them a long way with, you know, improving themselves and like wanting to be better and do the right thing.
Yeah, that is so important for all children to receive that kind of positivity and encouragement. But I think often boys struggle a little bit more than girls with that, because they don't tend to get noticed as much for, like you say, being surprisingly compliant and surprisingly disciplined and well behaved. You know, we just don't as a society expect them to be that way, so they don't get noticed when they're doing it. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let's move on and think a little bit about the second question. Pick out, if you can, at least one unique need that you think is most important to focus on in our early childhood classrooms. Which one do you think is most important for a teacher to remember and to be very mindful of in their practice?
Yeah, I'll start out with this one. This is one that I over time, as having a son myself who's 9, and also being in the classroom and seeing some of this firsthand, I think the idea of not suppressing what kids are doing with superheroes or any type of toys or swords, because these people perceive it as like, oh, he's violent, he's aggressive, but this is what kids are seeing, they're hearing, and I mean, but really kind of, if you're not comfortable with it, there's ways I think you could still accommodate some of that play, because it really suppresses boys when it's like, you can't play that, you can't do that, put that down, that's not a sword. And then it kind of just, then the defiance, I think some of that's defiance in certain incidences. So yeah, that superhero play, if they have like toys or weapons, you know, that are age appropriate, you know, obviously you could think about situations, you know, that you're like, okay, that's probably gone a little too far, but I think that's one that always comes to mind for me.
Yeah, Definitely. It's such an instinct to say no guns, no swords, no weapons of any kind, but what we forget is that that's an important thing for little boys to be trying on for size, ways that they can increase their effect on their environment. So that's a really important point. Thanks for sharing that, Soren. What else?
To piggyback on what Soren was saying, just promoting more activities that are hands-on, and using that testosterone that us males tend to possess. I think in the current early childhood education setting, it's such an emphasis on behaving and kind of like your slide was stating, kind of assimilating in a way that is kind of unrealistic to just the manners of males in general. Having a long attention span, or and it goes back to what you're saying about the whole brain delay, and just our maturity levels and things of that nature. So just things to accommodate our bodily functions as males.
You have hit the nail on the head there. I don't think that women in general feel that comfortable about accommodating those needs, but we need to be better about that. Speaking as a representative of the female side of this thing, but that is a really good point. We need to be much more open to the way that men express affection and males play with each other and tease each other and so forth. So any other thoughts on this, Joseph or Mitchell? Mitchell.
Yeah, so I guess that was like a larger portion of this, as far as like the testosterone, like the biology of it combined with like, I guess, the physical behavior. But I think also I would say, to add to that it's mostly like the way that lines up against like a female student. So it's like you get into this sort of like, I guess, model of what you want to see or expect to see. And then when it's anything that's slightly away from that, that becomes like an extreme in your mind. And I think just recognition of that, along with, understanding, I guess, the technical aspects of biology and like, I guess, having those options of physicality and whatnot, I think are something to be aware of in the way that you approach, I guess, supporting these students.
So I'm just curious about something, Mitchell. Do you really try in your classroom to provide lots of opportunities for boys to express all of that physically and actively?
I do. I mean, I like to add like exercising the circle time and like, some things that I guess like all the students can do, but obviously it's like it will cater more towards these higher energy, more physical students. But I mean, really, it kind of works. I mean, for my classroom specifically, because I have female students that are also high energy and very aggressive and stuff like that. So it works for them too. So yeah, I try to be inclusive and individualize, I guess, as much as possible.
All right, thank you. Joseph, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, I guess it follows the same vein as much of what's been said already. I think what is needed, in my opinion, is less rigidity in our expectations. When we have the idea of how young children should behave for what is like socially acceptable, or just what I as the teacher prefer in my classroom, there has to be some sense of letting go of all of that to accommodate meeting the needs of children. I mean, boys and girls, but especially with boys, when say they do need that physical time to get up and move their bodies, and but it's circle time and we sit quietly and nicely at circle time. So, I don't know what this kid is doing when he thinks it's okay to walk around while I'm trying to give a lesson or something. Like, we need to loosen the reins a little bit on that and have some allowance for those things to happen, so that we're better able to meet these children where they are.
Yeah. I think it's important for all teachers to remember that one size does not fit all. And whether it happens to be a male or a female student who has a need to move, we need to accommodate that. We need to build these opportunities into the day. So, very thoughtful contributions here. So now we're going to look at a little bit more of the nuts and bolts here. We've been talking much more generally previously, but here's your opportunity to kind of get down to the nitty gritty here and make some recommendations to the teachers that will be watching this webinar about what kinds of activities and materials specifically do you feel are important to include in the classroom and in their curriculum, in the daily experiences that students will be having.
It seems like in the recent years, at least that I've been in the education field, there's kind of been a retract or almost there's not so much attention on recess play. It seems like we're kind of moving away from that, and I think one of your slides may have spoke about that as well. But just promoting more outside play, and kind of move from this curriculum that is so much literacy based and kind of articulated, but kind of to what I was speaking to previously, just more opportunities for children to be hands-on with their learning. And if that's like a more play-based curriculums, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
So what kinds of materials do you think you would see in a classroom that was accommodating that?
So one example that I have, and I guess it's not materials in particular, but an activity, kind of to what Mitchell was speaking to earlier. In my early childhood education class, in my ECE class, we used to, before we'll start off with a circle, we would have all the kids that we knew were like our high energy kids go run laps out in the field, and this would kind of, make it a bit easier on the educators, when these guys tire themselves out a bit and there's not so much, focus on disciplinary actions after that. So that was like kind of our solution to getting those guys with the high energy to focus on, activities where it was a little more hard for them to, stay in tune. So.
Okay, thank you, Trey. What else? What are some things you want to see in a classroom? Mitchell?
Yeah, so I guess branching off of that slightly, like obviously, the activities that I just mentioned, right, as far as the exercise during circle time, I really like these like dots that they have that you could kind of like have a smaller area of like physical activity within the classroom. And then I think the biggest thing though that I was really, I guess, prevalent to me when I first got in the classroom or at school was the outdoor play is like, I feel like it's become this thing where teachers are just kind of like, you're outside, so this is physical activity. And it's like, while I'm out there, I'm like actually running with the kids. I'm actually like throwing balls and playing, I'm actually playing the physical activities with them. But I also realized that, and maybe this will help with, coronavirus and everything, but people will actually like get in shape. Like I also notice I'm actually like an athlete. So it doesn't bother me to like, be a little bit like they were saying in the slide, as far as being a little bit more physical, in a playful way, right? It's like I could bring all that, and I noticed that wasn't necessarily happening. So I guess as far as an activity to provide to like actually be modeling and be a part of the physical activities.
Okay, so you would be the material then. More direct involvement, more engagement with what's going on with the kids.
Yeah, and I noticed it wasn't just, I mean, obviously we're speaking about boys, but it was like all the kids, right? They all like that. It's like, oh, let's chase Mr. Mitchell, and, you know, he's running from us, and, you know, and they'll just run for hours. Versus if I'm just telling them, like, guys, just go run, just play. Then it's kind of like they get bored with that, and they're like, we can't chase each other. Like, that's no fun. We want to see if Mr. Mitchell could catch us, or, you know.
It's all part of that relationship building, right? All right, what else?
Suppose adding on to the focus on physical activities, I would just also have a little caveat that we don't just limit that in the classroom to only like dancing. Because that's honestly a time of the day where I'd lose a lot of my boys. All right, I'm gonna put on the song. Here we go. But aside from that, I think loose parts are very important. Like the construction and deconstruction of things seems to really promote the curiosity and exploration of boys in particular. So I don't know if like, obviously we all have blocks and stuff like that, but if you have something you can deconstruct, like an old appliance or something, bring that into the classroom and let them take it apart and try and figure out how things work and what it looks like inside. And, you know, all this kind of thing. I think that's another piece that's often missed in many cases. And then just to second what Mitchell was saying about having an indoor like full body movement type space, if you can accommodate it, I strongly recommend that.
Thank you, Joseph. And I might add from my perspective that those deconstruction projects, it's great if they have to figure out how to reconstruct things and put them back together. It's such good practice. Soren, you haven't let us know what your ideas are about this.
Sure. I mean, I think the other three gentlemen on the panel have kind of alluded to this, but I'm just in general, I'm always a proponent of very short circle times because I think that's where you get a lot of the defiant behavior for boys and girls. I mean, but I think it helps with those boys who are really active. So trying to think of outside the box ways, if you're trying to get certain things in, maybe different ways throughout the day you can have those concepts going. I think the other thing that's important to stress is kind of, as I was mentioning at the beginning of the questions, kind of that sensitivity and those stereotypes that might come up with boys versus girls. So making sure you have activities and materials to share the difference of, you know, a boy can do this and a girl can do this. And because we so quickly, when you get into stuff like Lakeshore Kaplan, you buy those things, it's like, this is a girl outfit, this is a boy outfit, this is our roles. And so kind of keeping that sensitivity, those stereotypes that we're trying to break down as far as what they can do and they can't do, because it can be very obvious in an early childhood classroom and what you offer and how you share it.
Yeah, that is such a great way to break down those stereotypes that we all hold. I think one of the big challenges that some of the teachers that I have worked with have found is that sometimes the cultural and familial expectations get in the way of that. I remember one little boy that we were working with, and his dad would come unglued if he came to pick up his son and he was prancing around in the princess dress. You know, so that is an important thing to expose the children to, I believe. They need to have the opportunity to try on all sorts of different, you know, personas and activities like that. So you bring up a very good point. Thank you. Okay. So our last question, and this is more aimed, I think, at any administrators and leaders who may happen to watch this webinar. What message do you think is most important to send to administrators and leaders about providing a more male-friendly environment within our classrooms. Because a lot of this is based on policies and procedures and, you know, that sort of thing in our programs. So it's important for the administrators, the directors, the principals, you know, people like that, people in leadership positions need to understand what we think is an important step to take to make our classrooms more male friendly.
I think there needs to be an increased number of men in early childhood programs. I think early childhood programs are kind of a reflection of, you know, the teacher base, you know, and that's why you don't really see a gender neutral, you know, dynamic within ECE. More male teachers, more male influencers and models within those programs.
Absolutely. Do you have any thoughts on what would be an effective way to recruit more men into the field?
That's a good question. I think it starts with individuals like us, you know, Joseph, Mitchell, and Soren, and myself. You know, kids just have to see it. They have to be exposed to it to see that it's possible. You know, and just representation is a big piece. You know,
Yeah.
if you're not seeing any teachers that look like you or, you know, may reflect you know, your life, that's not something you'll be inspired to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I have to admit, I was shocked when I read the statistic of 97.2% of teachers are female. I mean, I think I knew it, but it just shocked me to realize that there are so few men that are involved in the early years with kids. So thank you for that, Trey. What other message do we want to pass on? Mitchell?
Yeah, I think kind of branching off of what Trey was saying, I think also like not just male teachers in the classroom, but male teachers in positions of leadership within the administration, right? Because I think it's one thing, of course, it's like it's an education thing too, right? Like it's good for them to have this information of statistics and like the biology behind it and understanding what I guess strategies and techniques can work, because I've gotten a lot of pushback as far as the way I do be a little bit more active and physical with the kids and whatnot. And it's kind of like, if you understood the statistics, you wouldn't be so tough on me. You would understand what's happening, right? But also I think that's a part of it is like, if it was also a male leader in position, they would probably understand, right? So yeah, I think a combination of that, the education, more representation in leadership of male presence, and then, yeah, just having, I guess, having that kind of drive this changing of the policies, right? Because as long as I guess the culture of it is still looked at as far as, you know, through a female lens of like, with a, you know, a girl, I guess a female child standard, it's kind of like, there's not going to be change, right? Until you start to adjust the perspective that's occurring, but then also the way the perspective is analyzing what they're looking at.
Thank you, Mitchell. Well said. What other messages are we going to pass on to leadership?
Oh, go ahead, Joseph.
Well, to piggyback off of what Mitchell was getting at, I think that the amount of flexibility that we need to allow in how we approach our practices in early childhood may need some rethinking, and it's something to reflect on, especially from the perspective of a coach who's like technically in leadership position. Like you see it all the time that teachers are putting these limitations, you know, not just on boys, but I mean, particularly on boys who want to take risks. You know, don't climb up the slide, don't play like that, you're being too rough. And to that, I'd say, that's probably not true, as long as you're there to add some guidance to the situation. You're there to ensure safety. That is part of our job. If rough and tumble play is something you haven't been comfortable with in the past, it's something you might need to start warming up to. Yeah, so
We
that's
need to
that's one
provide
thing.
mud wrestling for all teachers, right?
There we go. We'll have a PDI day for that. No, but in seriousness, I also think that gender stereotyping needs to be something that is handled more consciously, whether teachers realize it or not. They are communicating what the role and an appearance of boys and girls should be, and it's toxic and divisive for them growing up. Like even just having younger, me being a teacher in the classroom and a boy with long hair, like that was a topic of daily conversation because it's not something they're told is okay. And I had a co-teacher who was female who had short hair. And so my kids would tease and be like, "Oh, Mr. Joseph's a girl. He has long hair. And Miss So-and-so is a boy because she has short hair." Like, okay, we're gonna have this conversation over and over and over again, or so-and-so can't like purple or pink because they're a boy. We have to be conscious of that, and especially in terms of like how we address social emotional care. It's okay for boys to have feelings, and maybe they express their frustration or sadness in a different way, and we have to kind of take a step back if that was triggering maybe, and get to their level and meet them where they are, and instead of being so reactive. Those are some of my things off the top of my head, I suppose.
Thank you, Joseph. That was very well put. Soren, you're going to wrap us up here. What are
Sure.
you think are
I mean,
important?
I think of it, I know they kind of mentioned, Joseph mentioned classrooms, and there's talk about male educators. I mean, there's a lot, I think, around stereotypes on this, but practices, I think about kind of how you support your male staff. Practices and like thinking about, there are so few of us, is it really that, we're the elephant in the room often because there's one or two men. So it's like, I think of experiences like, oh, let's give the prize because you're a male. So we're so glad you're here. And it's not, I don't think a lot of men are doing this because they want extra recognition. They're doing this because they like kids or they've grown a love for kids. That comes to mind. And policies as far as like is it the same for a male or a female staff member? So kind of thinking about those things, because there's all kinds of stories about how many men can be left alone with the kid versus the female. So kind of getting into those policies, because if you want, in my thought of like overall thought is like, if you want more men in this field, you have to kind of keep some neutral equity kind of ideas with how you're practicing what you're saying, the policies. But that's just a few. I mean, I could go on and on. the policies and practices.
Yeah, I think in general, men are not treated as trustworthy caregivers in our field, and that needs to change. From my own perspective as a woman, I feel that in many cases, men get shortchanged when they do come into the field. There's always this suspicion, that there's something not right about this. But what the big thing I think that leaders need to remember is that this comes from our cultural stereotyping, comes down from society. I mean, that that nursery rhyme, what are boys made of? What are girls made of? This is something that's been going on for a very long time. And it's time that it stopped, because we need to offer more trust and honor the differences. Don't squelch them, I think. So I want to thank all four of you for a wonderful conversation this afternoon. I have just enjoyed this so much, and I know that the teachers who watch this webinar will also enjoy hearing all of your perspectives. So thank you so much for joining us, and for all of your thoughtful contributions to our conversations. Thanks so much. For the teachers that are watching this webinar, you should have received a link to the assignment that you will be completing and turning into your director. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation and have learned something new.